Hello, everyone, again. We have engineer Richard, who holds a master's degree in the mechanical engineering from Cambridge University, and has worked as a strategy consultant for clients worldwide in the industrial and energy sectors. As a partner at Radiant Energy Group, Engineer Richard serves as the lead report writer on nuclear energy and heads the public attitude toward clean energy initiative, the world's largest publicly released released international studies on what people think about nuclear and other clean energy sources. Richard is British and speaks both English and French and is currently based in London. Thank you so much, Richard, for coming today, and the mic is yours.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here presenting nuclear. As a bit of background about Radiant Energy Group, we're a consultancy for the energy transition. We primarily advise on nuclear energy and have been around for maybe 5 years. My colleague, Mark Nelson, a longtime friend and now colleague, he set up the company and I joined him during the pandemic after a period of time, as we all had during those COVID years, a bit of soul searching, thinking what we wanted to do with our life, our career. And that's what made me think it's time to join Radiant and make something good for the planet. And I think, this week has been especially exciting for us. Just yesterday, in fact, obviously a lot has happened in politics in America, but a lot is also happening in Germany. So to kick things off, want to look at Germany. So as we speak, I think the German government is collapsing and announcing plans possibly for an early election. And what we see is that Germany's energy transition, has been pretty bad for energy security. So in end of 2021, when the German coalition formed, they stood with their view to phase out all nuclear use. A whole ton of nuclear reactors closed down in 2023 and 2022. And since then, Germany reversed from being a net exporter of electricity, making them a lot of money, to now being a massive net importer of electricity. Obviously, that's expensive. And the result is that the economy has suffered with more expensive electricity without being able to make as much electricity revenues as they were before. So nuclear is at the center of this German coalition falling, in my view. There's many other reasons why the German government has been underperforming. But when it comes to energy, I think nuclear is the central bit of their energy issues. Here we can see a view of where Germany is in October 2024, last month. They're right at the bottom of the European ranking for clean electricity share of generation. And that's because they've turned off their nuclear. If the coalition government that got in power at the end of 2021 had said, let's stop the nuclear phase out and keep what we've got, they'd be mid-table. If that nuclear phase out had never happened, actually, there's good reason to think Germany would be right at the very top of the table, as clean as Sweden, France, Finland. But they chose not to go down that route. And Germany is a great example of how nuclear affects politics and politics very much affects nuclear. So what could have been different? So we love to make the comparison of Germany and France, two neighboring countries, arguably cultural similarities, similar populations, similar economy makeup, but very, very different energy mixes. France went all in on nuclear in the 70s. Germany, later energy transition, and went all in on wind solar, getting rid of nuclear, instead prioritizing coal and gas on their grid. As you can see here, Germany suffered as far as the environment is concerned, with higher emissions throughout the year, but also massive volatility in their emissions as the year goes on. On days like today, where in Europe there's a lot of clouds and not much wind, emissions will be very high and electricity prices will be very high. Whereas in France, very steady emissions throughout the year, very steady price throughout the year. How much did these two energy transitions cost? Well, in today's numbers, Germany's spent maybe 320 billion euros on their energy transition, and their electricity at the moment is roughly 40 euros per megawatt hour at wholesale prices. This is slightly old data, hence the roughly. By contrast, France, taking into account inflation from the 1970s and 80s builds, they only spent 130 billion euros. So that's 2 to 3 times less. And their electricity prices are much lower as a result. So go from Germany, let's go to USA, the other big sort of political upset, political change this week. What's interesting in the US is the political divide amongst the voter base on different energy sources. And what's interesting is the wind and the solar farms have a much greater political divide than nuclear does. There's a lot more bipartisan support for nuclear than we see for especially wind, but a bit solar. So it's going to be interesting to see as we change from a Democratic government to a Republican government to see the transition of which energy sources get prioritized. My view is, given Republicans have greater support for nuclear than they do for wind, there's going to be a small shift over from wind towards nuclear. I think solar is still going to do well. Like Republicans, Democrats, they generally still support solar, especially rooftop solar. So that's going to carry on. Large scale solar farms, we'll see. But yeah, as far as nuclear is concerned, I think a lot of the people on the call will be from America. As far as nuclear is concerned, this new government that's come in might be very good for nuclear new builds in the country. So that's sort of a quick view of what's going on at the moment, but I want to go a bit more detailed with a background of nuclear. First off, I want to draw attention to nuclear is not coal. The two energies get confused for each other incredibly often. Just this week, COP29 climate conference came out with a video saying, you know, climate change is bad, emissions are bad, and in the background of the video, when they were talking about emissions being bad, they showed an American nuclear power plant, and it infuriates me that, you know, the best minds on climate can't tell the difference. It's important that these things get differentiated so that the right thing gets shut down. So we're going to play a little game of spot the difference. So I'm going to go through on the nuclear power plant. One difference is often you get a little containment dome, and that's there for a safety precaution to hold in any pressure increases. Another difference, coal power plants, you get these huge, forget the proper conveyor belts that lift up the coal to put them into the furnaces. And then you also get in the background there the coal heaps where you get your month's worth of stored coal. Coal plants have got these really big chimneys that let off the greenhouse gas emissions. By contrast, nuclear sometimes, but not always, has those small chimneys that we see here in this German nuclear power plant. And those nuclear power plants, small chimneys, are only used in case of an emergency. So you're unlikely to see any smoke ever coming from them. Now, the difference in coal, you have these water treatment plants. You don't need that with nuclear. It's a clean source of energy. And then in a nuclear power plant, you'll often get much bigger car parks. A typical nuclear power plant will hire about 500 people. Coal power plant will be a fraction of that, much smaller. There are though some similarities. Both nuclear and coal have turbine halls. This is where the electricity is generated. Big lumps of metal spin round, driven round by steam, and that spinning of the lump of metal creates the electricity. And an obvious similarity between these two is the cooling towers. Again, not always a similarity. In the UK, none of our nuclear power plants have cooling towers. They're all by the sea and just use seawater to cool themselves down, and therefore don't need nuclear power plants. Don't need cooling towers. So that's a fun game to spot the difference. Now for some more photos. Here's just a view of the life cycle of nuclear energy. So you start off with this raw uranium, and that gets mined. On the right here is a photo of my colleague Mark Nelson in one of the mines. Super small mines generate small amounts of uranium, which end up making a huge amount of electricity. That uranium gets mined, it then gets milled, and then it gets converted. And this conversion converts the milled uranium into a form that is easy to process. And typically that processing involves enrichment. Not all power plants need enrichment, but most do. So enrichment is basically making sure that you've got the spicier uranium-235 at a higher concentration than the typical uranium-238. That enriched uranium you put into little pellets like here, and you put all those different pellets into these fuel bundles. Here we got Bill Gates showing off one of the fuel bundles. Those fuel bundles then go into the reactor pressure vessel, and that's where the magic happens. The fission happens, water starts heating up. That heated up water goes down pipes into the turbine hall, which is where the electricity is generated. All of this is overseen from the control room. Hard to get many photos of control rooms, often very security sensitive. Then at the end of the life cycle of nuclear, you've got the spent fuel, or what is commonly known as nuclear waste. You start off by putting that waste into these spent fuel pools, often inside the power plant, and that's just there for a couple of years for it to cool down. Once it's cooled down enough, you've got a whole host of different storage options. So on the left, you've got my colleague Maddie Hilly with her baby visiting a outdoor storage facility in the US. And then on the left, you've got a indoor storage facility down in Netherlands, which is a great facility. If ever you are in Netherlands, do see if you can do a visit. They've got a great visitor centre. They're open to school trips. They're super hospitable for a waste storage facility. If you want more complex forms of storage, you've got the option of putting it deep underground, as they're doing in Finland, or you can do as in France and recycle your fuel. So that's where you take the waste, you recycle, you get the good stuff back out, and you have much less of the bad stuff to look after. And what France does is, I think 30% of their power comes from recycled fuel. So yeah, they're world leaders in that. So what's nuclear got to offer? Well, in the words of Bill Gates, nuclear power is the only carbon-free energy source that can reliably generate power day and night through every season, almost anywhere on Earth, that has been proven to work on a large scale. So quickly, if we go through that, obviously fossil fuels aren't carbon-free. Wind and solar have high intermittency, so they're not reliable to the same way the others are. Usable anywhere. Well, hydropower, you need to have heavy rainfall in hills. Geothermal, ideally, you need to be near the Earth's crust. And proven at scale. for me, what this meant is proving a high mix within your grid. So fossil fuels, a lot of countries have 80% plus fossil fuels. Nuclear, we got France and Slovakia with 60%, 80% plus nuclear penetration. Hydropower, Iceland, Norway, right up there. Geothermal biomass are well penetrated in lots of countries. But wind and solar, other than very small countries like Denmark, there's no example of wind and solar being sort of the basis of your power system within a country. Nuclear also offers this value beyond just electricity. So the electricity nuclear provides is super useful. It's dispatchable. Also, nuclear provides this frequency controlled, voltage controlled, extra grid functions that are of value that are often forgotten about. In addition to that, nuclear power also provides heat, sort of waste heat. And usually that waste heat just goes back out to sea. In the UK, I think I was told the sea temperature goes up by 3 degrees centigrade outside a nuclear power plant, and the fish love it. They all come there to spawn. The fishermen also love it for those reasons. But that heat you can use for other purposes. So in China and a lot of Eastern Europe, they use nuclear heat for district heating. In Switzerland too, and there's also examples of using it for industrial heating. So say you've got a paper factory, you can use that heat to dry out the pulp. Nuclear also has the potential for off-grid power. Already around the world at sea, there's hundreds of nuclear powered submarines, aircraft carriers, and other Navy ships. And in the future, there's a lot of work being done on seeing whether we can get maritime transport to use nuclear power. So container ships that at the moment generate 2 to 3% of global emissions, converting them all over to nuclear power. Other off-grid ideas is data centers. Plenty of news stories about Facebook, Microsoft, Google, all looking to get nuclear to power their data centers. And then there's also a few ideas out there about mining communities and also military communities out in remote regions using microreactors to power their communities. Finally, nuclear power plants give off radiation, and that radiation is put to good use. In the medical world, what they do is they irradiate certain metals and certain other products, and you're allowed to ingest that, and that radiation gives off radiation from within you, and they use that in hospitals to see where in your body you might have cancers. They also use it to target those cancers and kill them off. So people often worry about nuclear safety and the number of people that have passed away from nuclear accidents. What they often forget is that without nuclear, there'd be millions more that wouldn't be saved from cancer and other diseases. Nuclear by the numbers. So around the world, there are 170 power plants. Those 170 power plants, which, if I was a smarter guy, I could be able to name them all off by heart. There's that few. Those 170 provide 10% of the world's electricity at the moment. Unfortunately, the amount of electricity from nuclear hasn't grown at all in the past 2 decades. In the past two decades, there's some countries that have gotten rid of nuclear faster than they needed to, like Germany, Taiwan, Belgium, Spain is soon to do so, while a few others have built nuclear to make up for those losses. In total, there's only 32 countries that are using nuclear. And actually, within those 32, there's 5 key nuclear countries that you need to remember: the US, China, France, Russia, and South Korea. So if we take a step back, don't think about nuclear, think about the size of the prize. So in the IEA's, International Energy Agency's net zero emissions by 2050 scenario, the amount of clean electricity the whole world generates needs to go up by 7 times. So, and that's a huge amount. If we think that's in 25 years, we need to septuple the amount of clean electricity we use from our current base. That's going to take a lot of change. And how is that going to be achieved? Well, the IEA says that most of it's going to come from solar and wind, but that nuclear is going to need to go up by 4,000 terawatt hours, which, given its current position, is a bit over a doubling of nuclear generation. I saw earlier in the questions someone asked about the mix of nuclear. At the moment, nuclear is 9-10% of global electricity. In this IEA scenario, by 2050, it'd make up a similar mix of the 2050 energy mix. Bit of myth busting. So, public support. Yes, nuclear support has been low in the past, but it's on the way up. No, people around nuclear power plants actually do really like their nuclear power plants. In the US, 84% of residents within 10 miles of a nuclear power plant supported its use. Why is that? Well, the nuclear power plant, as I said earlier, has many jobs, and those jobs are incredibly well paid. Nuclear is the best paid energy compared to wind, solar, oil, gas, coal. Nuclear pays the best jobs. So those communities live a very wealthy, happy life. And then globally, there's 2.5 times more support for more nuclear power plants to be built than existing power plants to be banned. Like this public support is strongest in developing countries where they're just really keen to get more energy. And it's slightly weaker in Japan for obvious reasons, Fukushima, and then Brazil and Spain for more complex reasons. They're less pro-nuclear. Next myth is around safety. And there's the quote out there: 1 death is a tragedy, 1 million is a statistic. So around the world, coal pollution leads to particulates in the air. Those particulates get into your lungs and impact your health. And by some metrics, that leads to millions of premature deaths per year from coal power plants. But those don't really get spoken about. What does get spoken about is the nuclear tragedies. If we go through the 3 main tragedies, 3 Mile Island, there was no direct or indirect fatalities. Chernobyl, I'm always surprised to reread, to check my numbers. And when I tell others, they're always surprised. Fewer than 50 people are known to have been fatalities of the Chernobyl accident. And then in Fukushima, there were no direct fatalities from the radiation. It was the mismanagement of the evacuation that led to very premature deaths. On waste, the nuclear industry arguably is the best energy for looking after its waste. No other energy source has full accountability of its waste. Obviously, coal, gas, oil leads to emissions, waste that go up into the sky, but wind and solar, the people that build those, they don't keep a track of everything that's been built and every part that's gone out there, making sure that every part gets processed and recycled, stored away properly at the end of their life. But the nuclear industry has that full accountability. As we saw earlier with the photo of the Cova facility in the Netherlands, nuclear waste is securely stored already. There's plenty of options out there. This is a photo from inside Cova, and which I love to show because in the Netherlands they've put their national pieces of art inside these storage facilities. So when they're not on display in the museum, they need somewhere else to go that's high security, temperature controlled, and the nuclear power, the waste storage facility is the perfect example of that. Nuclear waste requires tiny amounts of volume. So to get your entire life's worth of energy from nuclear, you need a Coke can's amount of enriched uranium. And therefore, that's also all the waste you're going to need. So, next time you fill your car up with a few gallons of fuel, just think, you could have had a tiny sip of Coke instead, and that would have been enough. Next time, you see solar panels on the roof, think, there's a lot of volume of material on those roofs. Nuclear, you need, again, far less volume to make the same energy. And then for those that want a long-term solution for 100,000 years, beyond any I don't expect any of us, see the world carrying on the way it is in 100,000 years. But some people want long-term solutions like this to exist. My view is if there's a world in which we're unable to know where our nuclear waste is, there's a lot more worse that has gone on than can be caused by the waste. Radioactive waste, radiation from the waste goes down 99% within the first few years of it coming out of the reactor. So after 100,000 years, it's a tiny fraction of the radiation level that you start with. But long-term solutions do exist for the countries that want to pursue them. Then recently, there's been a lot of talk from anti-nuclear people of nuclear takes too long. And it can take a long time, but I want to put that into context. So here, what I'm showing is the UK's largest solar farm, Shotwick Solar. This produces 0.07 terawatt hours of power per year. Hornsea 2 is the UK's largest wind farm, an offshore wind farm. That took 6 years to complete, from planning consent to the first electrons on the grid. And that generates 5 terawatt hours per year of power. Then we've got Hinkley Point C. This has been massively delayed, but should take 18 years to complete. And once it's ready, it'll be generating 25 terawatt hours per year of output. Typically, a nuclear power plant takes 6 to 8 years, similar amount of time to get online as a wind farm, but Hinkley Point C is taking a lot longer. If you put these in context, Hinkley Point C will have taken 3 times longer to build than the wind farm, but once it's up and running, it'll be generating 5 times more power. It'll also be generating that power for 3 times more years. Nuclear power plants typically designed initially for 60 years, but as we're seeing in America, can be extended to 80 years, 100 years. We'll see how long these power plants go on for. So we like to think of this as big things come to those who wait. It's the energy mixes example of like the marshmallow test. Do you want one quick tasty good now, or many more if you wait a bit longer? And we can see this play out across the world with the fastest clean energy build-outs. So here we've got a graph of clean electricity per person in over time. And if we look at the Sweden graph, what we see is there in the 70s and 80s, they built a lot of nuclear and they managed to get to 8,000 kilowatt hours per person of nuclear electricity in the country. For a bit of context, the average American uses 10,000 kilowatt hours per year. So Sweden, back in the 1980s, was able to live the same quality of life in terms of electricity that an American was. And that was fully powered. Well, that could have been fully powered by nuclear. Of course, Sweden also has hydro and other energy sources. The other thing to see here is most of nuclear was built in the 70s and 80s. That's when the nuclear heyday was. But more recently, there's been a few great examples. So the UAE recently commissioned their 4 units at Baraka. And that has instantly made them be able to leapfrog every other country's energy transition. Their nuclear power plant has added more clean electricity per person than every Danish wind farm or every Swedish wind farm or every Australian solar farm. What's also great to see is UAE features twice here. So the Emirate state doesn't just focus on nuclear, it focuses on all the clean energies, and it's doing a good job. It's added a lot of solar, which of course in the UAE is super important given their need for air conditioning during the sunny days. So what does the future hold for nuclear? We got this tongue-in-cheek map of the world and what's going on in different countries. For the interest of time, I'm going to go through a few of these countries, and then if you've got questions about any of these countries, ask me in the Q&A. So first off, China. China is the mega builder. They build over half of the world power plants at the moment, and they're expecting to increase the amount of power plants that they build. This, the rest of the world is looking on and thinking, damn, these guys are really good. It's probably about time that we catch up. You might not be able to see, but today I'm wearing my t-shirt from the nuclear company. It's a US nuclear project developer that want to build 6 nuclear reactors. And if you go on their website, which I strongly recommend you do, they've got great content there. And they focus a lot of their messaging around the need for America to catch up with China. It's not okay for China to be leading the clean energy transition and for others to be waiting around. It's time for America to step up its game. Next is Russia. They are the leaders on nuclear exports. At the moment, they export the vast majority of nuclear power plants. They're building in Turkey, Egypt, Bangladesh, and then there's one other country that I've forgotten. Well, it's probably somewhere there on the list on the right. Belarus was the other one that they've recently exported. And they very much plan on continuing that export. They're constantly in conversation with African countries and making really good sales pitches there. And they're looking to sign some deals and build some nuclear power plants. And, that's great for the climate. The rest of the world needs to think geopolitically, do they want to have a stake in those geopolitical ties? Because when you build a power plant in a country, that's 60 years, your two countries are going to be tied together, working side by side. And that's a great geopolitical strength for Russia. And maybe it's time for the West to also start building those geopolitical ties, return to a world of globalization. Next, India. It's a more nascent story. It's early days. They've got their own reactor design, which comes from Canadian pressurized heavy water reactor heritage. And their plan is to just build a lot of these same reactors, these Indian reactors. They've put together a little consortium of their big industrial players, these companies on the right, and are tasking them, you guys go out and build a lot of these power plants. 2 gigawatts per year is the target. Next, finally, the US. The big question there is who's on first? Who's going to be building the next power plant? Is it the nuclear company or is it one of the many other utilities or project developers? Vogtle has recently finished. And at the moment, the market is wondering what's next. There's massive demand growth in electricity. That's driven by AI. That's driven by electrification of transport and of industry, and also driven by population growth in the country. There's also massive financial support in the US from the IRA, but also the Loans Program Office is offering huge support. But what's holding everyone up is fear of another Vogtle. Vogtle had its cost overruns. It led to Toshiba Westinghouse going bankrupt, and the electricity isn't the cheapest. It's cheaper than offshore wind in America, but it's not as cheap as would be liked. So that's what's the exciting things in the US. Who's going to be next to build these mega nuclear projects? Around the world, we've got 32 countries using nuclear. There's 11 at the moment that are building and planning nuclear. The ones that are planning that will be interesting to see progress are Indonesia, Ghana, Kazakhstan. Very recently had their referendum where they announced they'd want to build nuclear. The Philippines has an old nuclear reactor that they've not yet restarted. And if they could restart that, they'd massively help the country, bring down electricity prices, make the grids cleaner. And then Poland is a super exciting country. They're looking to build many, many nuclear reactors, which would be a great transition from coal to nuclear, a good, just transition story. The question there is, who's next? There's 35 nuclear curious countries and 100 plus other countries that are yet to consider nuclear. The key ones to look out for are Italy and Vietnam on this list on the right. Italy and Vietnam they're in the top 20 greenhouse gas emitting countries. So to get them building nuclear would be great for the climate and also great for their economies. So take a step back. I'm going to quickly go through a few of these countries and just call out what's going on there. So in Canada, the Battle Royale, that's a competition between what design is going to be built next. Is it the Westinghouse AP1000? Is it the CANDU Monarch reactor? Is it the General Electric 300 megawatt reactor that's already being built? But are they going to be building more? Second is the UK, where I'm from. Squeaky bum is a UK expression for a bit of uncertainty. And at the moment, we've got 15% of our electricity coming from nuclear. Unfortunately, all but one reactor is scheduled to go offline in the next 5-10 years. The UK was the only country that built a lot of advanced gas reactors, and they were super pioneering, and a lot was learnt. The downside is that they're built in a way which means that they can't be refurbished and life extended. All the other countries are able to extend for 60, 80, 100 years. The UK isn't, and therefore these power plants are shutting down. So UK is getting itself into this squeaky bum time where there's this uncertainty of it's not going to have that nuclear. This year we turn off all of our coal power plants. And there's the question, are we going to have that baseload generation for days like today when there's not much wind and there's not much sun? So we'll see. 2029, 2030 will be the real crunch point in the UK. In France, big toys is the tagline there. No country has more power plants for the amount of electricity that they use. It's about 65% of France's electricity come from nuclear. But the French are incredibly bad at using their power plants. If you compare like for like the same French reactor design to a US reactor design, the American reactor is getting 50% more power out from the same reactor. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the American reactor is making 50% more revenue off their power plant and making a lot more profits. So France has this huge amount of untapped potential, power plants that could be have their operations improved, could be made a lot more profitable, and could make the surrounding countries a lot cleaner. So that's something that's one to watch in the future. In Germany, we've covered their big regrets. The government at the moment is very much suffering. Further up north, Sweden had what Germany has at the moment, but a few years earlier, they had an anti-nuclear government that got a lot of their nuclear power plants to shut. That's led to high electricity prices. If you ask in public opinion surveys what you think is going to bring down your prices, nuclear is top of the list. People want nuclear to bring down electricity prices. So the Swedish government is planning to build a lot of nuclear power plants. We've covered Poland, the Yimbys, they want a lot to be built. Ukraine also planning on building a lot of new nuclear power plants. Down in Australia, bottom right of the map, there's Ozpol hell, so political hell. There's left and right arguing over like the most mindless aspects of nuclear. Are there going to be three-eyed fish or not? And that's just not what a good debate needs to be hearing. There's good reasons that nuclear should be allowed to be built, and there's good reasons to think that there's not much need for nuclear to be built. Sadly, those productive discussions, I don't think are being had enough. If we go back over to the left, the West, Mexico and Brazil, big countries, big populations, big emissions. There's not been much discussion of nuclear. Hopefully that changes. We'll see. Brazil's hosting the climate conference next year. If they're real climate leaders, as the UAE were when they hosted their climate conference, if Brazil wants to be of the same part, they'll start announcing some nuclear constructions as well as wind, solar, hydro builds. And I think the other place on this map to call out is Southeast Asia. Fast growing economies. Electricity is growing very quickly. They're looking to, grow their generation, and they're wanting to make it clean, and nuclear suits it well. So it's going to be interesting to see how much nuclear they build or they start building in the next 10 years. And then on the far west, Japan, they're restarting their reactors. So after Fukushima happened in 2011, they all got turned off. And then now we're coming around that, again, the public sees nuclear as great at reducing electricity bills. They're just worried about safety. And the government hasn't been great at communicating safety in the past, and that's going to take a long time for the public support to come on board. So as the years go on, we'll be seeing more public nuclear restarts as the public starts accepting nuclear. Final slide. What does the future hold? Mentioned COP28 in the UAE. That was last year. The big announcement there was that 25 countries were pledging to triple nuclear generation by 2050. To compare that, the IEA were only expecting, at best, a doubling of nuclear generation. So this is a massive pledge that the nuclear industry has signed up to, and countries around the world. So key countries that have signed up to this: US, UK, France, Canada, Japan, South Korea. But there's a whole raft of smaller countries that have also signed up. And this is massive for the nuclear industry because there's not been much construction going on, and therefore the industry has been small. And if we're going to triple nuclear, suddenly there's going to have to be a lot more jobs going into nuclear, and things are going to start moving a lot quicker, and it's going to be a super exciting place to be in the nuclear industry in these coming 30 years. So that's what I'm most excited by, this tripling nuclear pledge, and how do we deliver it? Is it deliverable? Well, if you look back at the 70s and 80s, in those heydays, over 10 years, we averaged 20 gigawatts per year being built from 30 countries. There's good reason to think that over these next 25 years, there'll be more countries building nuclear, and therefore being able to average 30 gigawatts per year should be doable. Back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have China and India building, or definitely not building as fast as they are building now. How does this look on a year-by-year builds and shutdowns basis? So as you can see here from the graph, lots of pink lines in the 70s and 80s when a lot was being built. And then more recently in the 2010s and 2020s, a lot of power plants have been shut down. As we go forwards, there'll be a few more shutdowns, but we're going to need to build at a growing rate of roughly 8% every year growing. So that's what the future holds for nuclear. Before we go on to questions and answers, there's a chance you won't get your question answered. If you want to ask it again, the QR code on the left will take you to my LinkedIn page. Send me a connection request and send me your question, and I look forward to answering it. And then on the right, the QR code there is for our public opinion data. We've got some of the richest public opinion data, 20 countries last year. This year, there's going to be over 30 countries that we poll. We poll people on what they think about nuclear, what they think about wind, solar, biomass, gas with carbon capture, and huge depth to the questions that we ask. So go there if you want some good reports on what the public thinks about nuclear and other clean energy options. Great. I think it doesn't leave very much time for Q&A, but
thank you.
I'm
Thank
all
you
ears.
so much, Engineer Richard, for this informative session and for your efforts and time. Thank you.
My pleasure.
For the quick Q&A session, the first question we have. Do you want to read?
I'd rather you read because I'm a very slow reader.
Okay.
Sorry.
How do you see international collaboration in nuclear energy regulation evolving, particularly as new reactor designs and technologies emerge?
I hope there is more collaboration. It takes a lot of money to license a reactor to be built in a certain country, and therefore it slows down the amount that gets built if you're going to have to pay billions every new country you want to build in. And there's good reason to think, if one credible, respectable country allows the building of a reactor, that power plant is safe enough to operate in the other countries. So it's something that should be happening, and I think it's going to have to come from the top. Politicians will have to discuss. There's going to have to be agreements, and that's where it will come from, in my view.
Okay. How are industries overcoming a challenge of radioactive waste?
We've had the challenge for 50-something years. So the day-to-day, what you do is you put on protective gear, and when you finish your day of work, you have your radiation tested, and 99.9% of the time it's low. If it's slightly higher, you test again to make sure it's not the machine that's bugging. But otherwise, they look after you. And then, increasingly they're using robots, especially around maintenance. And that helps distance plant workers from the radiation. But, I like to stress that these workers, they're there because they understand nuclear really well, and therefore they're smart people. They've also gone on the internet and learned about radiation, and they're smart enough to know that it's perfectly safe to work at these nuclear power plants. If it was an unsafe place to work, there wouldn't be anyone working there. So I think people can feel reassured that it's a safe place to work.
Okay, thank you. And what are the potential risks and benefits of expanding nuclear energy use in terms of water consumption, thermal pollution, and land use?
Thermal pollution, as I said, in the UK, the power plant there returns water at 3 degrees higher to the sea, and that's absolutely great for the biodiversity in the sea there. I've heard similar stories in Diablo Canyon and elsewhere that the slightly higher water temperatures really benefit the marine life. Then what were the other two environmental concerns? Land use. There's only 170 power plants across the world that generate 10% of the electricity. You need very, very little land for nuclear. That's not a concern. And then, there was a third one that I've forgotten.
Okay. Is nuclear energy the future compared to solar energy when it comes to climate change and cost?
It depends which country you're from. If you're in Slovakia, they're looking to get to 100+% nuclear. They're looking to generate more nuclear than they need so that they can export it elsewhere. But of course, for most countries, I think wind and solar is going to be growing very fast and will make up a large proportion of the electricity mix. So we need a mix of energies. Different energies suit different countries. Build what works best for your country.
Okay. What is the latest technology in the use of nuclear energy, and how do we overcome the radiation involved in nuclear energy?
So there's lots of new technologies around. There's lots of different advancements in safety, non-proliferation, in waste, in being able to provide flexible power. But in my mind, the advancement that matters most is what's cheapest and easiest to build, because that's what's holding nuclear back. Nuclear needs to be cheap and easy to build, and then it'll be able to grow. If you look at the countries that are most cutting edge with their nuclear, which are China and Russia, most of the time they're building the same pressurized water reactors that the world's been building for 40, 50 years. We don't need advancements. What's more important, advancements are good, but what's more important is being able to build what you've already got on time and on budget and make it cheaper as time goes on.
Okay, thank you. And our final question is from Dr. Muhammad. He wants to ask you a question.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really informative. I enjoyed it very much.
My pleasure.
But I have a question maybe outside your presentation. What we discussed so far is all about fission. How about fusion? What do you guys think about it? And it has great potential if we can harness the technology.
So only a couple of weeks ago, I was down in the south of France at ITER, where they're building one of these fusion centers, and it was great to see the power plant, the plant there. Amazing science that's going on. But what I thought was amazing was this demonstration is being built. It's costing tens of billions, and at best, it's only expecting, I think it was 500 megawatts of power. Obviously, it's very early days, but that's only 500 megawatts, which is less than most of our nuclear power plants as we have at the moment. I see fission as an amazingly worthwhile science experiment, up there with the International Space Station and CERN, pushing the edges of science. And the importance of that is that you get lots of offshoots in new metallurgy discovered, new magnets improved. Also brings together more international collaboration, which is definitely needed at the moment. And I think that's why fusion is good. I don't see fusion as generating electricity profitably on the grid at scale until after 2050. That's absolutely not to say we shouldn't be investing in fusion now, but we shouldn't be pinning our hopes on a clean transition on fusion.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much again for this informative session. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you all. Highlighting this session is being recorded and will be uploaded soon on PyPatro YouTube channel. So make sure to subscribe on our channel. Thank you all. Bye.